A man at a breakfast table was told there was news, and said he would rather not be told, and then said he would hear it anyway. The sentence that opens the book above that scene is one you already know. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Read that again, because there is something missing from it. The version everybody prints has a comma after fortune. The first edition does not, and neither does the text I am reading from. That is a small thing, and I am starting with it on purpose, because this novel is misquoted more than any other book in English, and almost every one of those misquotations makes it sound softer than it is. Then, the husband. You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it. Everyone knows what this book is about. A proud man, a prejudiced woman, first impressions. Both of them wrong, both corrected. That is the answer on the exam paper, and I want to argue with it, because the woman in question gives her own account of what went wrong, and it is not prejudice. She uses a different word, and she uses it about herself. And almost nobody quotes that sentence. There is a second thing the summaries leave out. This is supposed to be the great romance, and yet the moment everything turns does not happen between two people at all. It happens to one person, alone, reading. So which is it? Was she wrong about a man, or was she wrong about herself? Today, in 20 minutes, I'm reading Pride and Prejudice, in Jane Austen's own words from the 1813 text. The most famous love story in English turns on a woman reading a document twice. A man crossed a country assembly room, looked at a woman who was sitting down because there were not enough men to go round, and gave his verdict out loud. She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. Note the colon. Everybody prints a comma there. Note also that she is close enough to hear it, and does. Now, the standard reading of this scene is that Elizabeth forms a prejudice against him and spends 400 pages correcting it. But watch what she actually says about it, a chapter later, sitting with her sister and a friend, talking it over. I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. I want to stop the whole episode on that line, because she has just told us the truth about herself in under a dozen syllables, and she has told it in public as a joke, which is how people usually tell the truth about themselves. His pride is fine. She could live with his pride. What she cannot live with is that he damaged hers. That is not a judgment about his character. That is an injury to her self-image. And from this point on, every piece of evidence about this man will be weighed by a person who has something at stake in the answer. Have you ever done that? Formed a view of somebody in the first 10 minutes and then spent months quietly collecting reasons to keep it? Not lying. Not even knowing you were doing it. Just noticing the things that fit and letting the rest go past. A woman walked 3 miles across wet fields on her own because her sister was ill, and arrived at a rich man's house with her hem filthy. What follows is one of the most quietly vicious passages Austen ever wrote, and it is just 2 women in a drawing room going through her appearance item by item. Her hair so untidy, so blousy, and then, yes, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat, 6 inches deep in mud. 6 inches. Somebody looked and measured and remembered. Every one of us has been in a room where this was happening about somebody who had just left, and in a room where it was happening about us and we could not hear it. Austen puts the reader in both places at once, which is the trick she does better than anyone. Here is what I think is the real content of the scene, though. Elizabeth walked 3 miles through mud because her sister was sick, and that is a completely admirable thing to have done. The women in the drawing room turn it into evidence of poor breeding. The man in the room turns it into evidence of something else entirely. He is not offended by the mud. He notices her eyes and says so, and it is the beginning of everything. The same fact, 3 readings, depending entirely on what each person already wanted to be true. That is the machine this whole novel runs on, and it is running in the background of every single scene from here to the end. Every one of us has been in the room where this was happening about somebody who had just left, and in the room where it was happening about us, and we could not hear it. So when you last decided what somebody was like, were you reading them, or were you reading the thing you already wanted them to be? A young officer in a red coat sat down beside her and told her a long, calm, detailed story about how he had been cheated. He had been in the county for days. She had known him for a matter of hours, and the story was about Mr. Darcy. Listen to how he starts, because it is a masterpiece of construction. His father, Miss Bennet, the late Mr. Darcy, was one of the best men that ever breathed, and the truest friend I ever had. He opens by praising the family. He establishes himself as the injured party of a good man's son. He never asks her to believe him, he simply tells her at length and lets her arrive at it herself. And she believes every word, immediately, completely, without asking a single person who might know. Why? She tells us that too, later, and it is the most uncomfortable sentence in the novel, so I will save it. For now, notice only this. The story he tells her is the story she wanted to be true. It confirms the verdict she formed at the assembly, and it makes her earlier annoyance retrospectively wise. He is not persuading her of something, he is handing her a reason for something she already felt. That is what flattery actually is. Not compliments. Compliments are easy to see coming. Flattery is somebody agreeing with the version of events in which you were right all along. Who has done that for you lately, and what did you conclude off the back of it? A clergyman came to stay, chose a daughter, and proposed to her by reading out his reasons in numbered order. Here is the beginning of the list. My reasons for marrying are, first, that I think it a right thing for every clergyman in easy circumstances, like myself, to set the example of matrimony in his parish. First, it is professionally appropriate. Secondly, it will make him happier. Thirdly, and he notes he perhaps should have said this earlier, his patroness told him to. The comedy is perfect, and the arithmetic underneath it is not comedy at all. This man will inherit the house the Bennet family lives in. There are 5 daughters and no sons, and when the father dies, they leave. Marrying Mr. Collins is, for one of them, the difference between a home and no home. So when Elizabeth refuses him, and her mother goes to her father to force the issue, the father delivers the verdict of the book. An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. He is joking. He is siding with his daughter. He is also, in the same breath, a man who has not saved a penny for 5 children and is handling the consequences with a witticism from behind a desk. Austen lets you enjoy him and indict him in the same sentence, and she does not tell you which one to do. Because here is the thing about the funniest man in the book. Every disaster in the second half of the novel is downstream of his refusal to take anything seriously. Is a father who makes his daughters laugh while leaving them with nothing a good father, or just a likable one? Her closest friend accepted the same man 3 days later and did not apologize for it. Charlotte Lucas is 27, plain by the book's own account, with no money and brothers who are relieved she will not be their problem. When Elizabeth cannot hide her shock, Charlotte answers her directly. I am not romantic, you know, I never was. I ask only a comfortable home. I think this is the most honest speech in the novel and the one that costs the reader the most. Because the transaction Charlotte is describing is exactly the transaction the opening sentence described, the one everyone quotes as a joke. A single man with a fortune must be in want of a wife. The joke is that families need him to be, and now here is a woman doing that arithmetic out loud, without irony, about her own life. Watch Elizabeth's reaction, because it tells you something about Elizabeth rather than about Charlotte. She is disgusted. She thinks less of her friend. She calls the marriage humiliating, and it takes her most of the book to stop. The woman who prides herself on seeing clearly cannot look straight at a friend making a rational decision under real constraints, because that decision does not flatter her picture of how people should behave. Which of your judgments about other people's choices are actually about how you would like to see yourself? He walked into a room where she was sitting alone, paced for a while, and then said this. In vain have I struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. In vain have I struggled. Not in vain I have struggled, which is how it is printed almost everywhere. The inversion matters. It is the sound of a man who has lost an argument with himself. And then he keeps talking. Here is Austen's summary of the rest of it. His sense of her inferiority, of its being a degradation, of the family obstacles which judgment had always opposed to inclination. He explains, at length, while proposing how far beneath him she is and how hard he fought not to feel this. She refuses, and her refusal is not about his rank or his fortune. It is about the performance she has just watched. Had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner, she tells him the way he asked spared her any regret about saying no. Then she finishes him, the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry. Now here is what I find remarkable about this scene, and it is why I do not think the book is about pride versus prejudice as two separate faults. Both of these people are doing the same thing. He cannot separate his opinion of her from his opinion of himself. Neither can she. He proposes in a way that protects his dignity. She refuses in a way that repairs hers. They are not opposites in this scene, they are twins. The next morning, he was waiting in a lane, put two closely written sheets of paper into her hands, and walked away without waiting for her to say anything. The letter begins, "Be not alarmed, madam, on receiving this letter, by the apprehension of its containing any repetition of those sentiments." He is not asking again, he is filing a response. And I want to point at the form of it, because the form is the argument. He does not chase her, he does not stage a scene, he does not send a friend to explain, and he does not wait for a reply. He writes the thing down, hands it over, and removes himself from the room so that whatever she decides without him standing there. That is, structurally, the opposite of everything Wickham did. Wickham gave her a story, in person, warmly, at the perfect moment, and asked nothing. Darcy gives her a document, coldly, at the worst possible moment, and leaves. Both of them are trying to change her mind about the same two men. Only one of them can be checked. And that is the difference the whole novel is built on, though nobody in it ever says so out loud. One account is designed to be agreed with, the other is designed to be verified. And that distinction is not a period detail, it is the whole problem of taking in information from anybody at all. The pleasant version arrives already shaped to fit what you think. The checkable version arrives cold, badly timed, and asking you to do work. Which of those two have you been believing this week? She read it once, in the lane, in a fury, and by her own account, she could hardly take in the words. She decided it was false before she reached the end of the first sheet. She put it away, and then she took it out and read it again. And this is the sentence the entire novel turns on, which is not a line of dialogue and is almost never quoted. And she read it again. Widely different was the effect of a second perusal. Nobody is present. Nobody argues with her. Nobody produces new evidence. It is the same paper, the same handwriting, the same words an hour later. She did not change her mind because somebody argued her out of it. She changed it alone, on the second reading of a letter she had thrown down in a rage the first time. And then comes the passage I have been holding back, because it is her own diagnosis, and it is not the one on the exam paper. "How despicably have I acted," she says, and then, "I, who have prided myself on my discernment, I, who have valued myself on my abilities." And then the sentence that I think is the whole book. "But vanity, not love, has been my folly." Not prejudice, vanity. And she goes further and describes the exact mechanism. Pleased with the preference of one and offended by the neglect of the other, on the very beginning of our acquaintance, I have courted prepossession and ignorance, and driven reason away where either were concerned. Courted. She went looking for the version that suited her. She did not fall into error, she pursued it because it felt better. And then the sentence people get wrong by dropping the comma. "Till this moment, I never knew myself," She stood at the top of a valley, looking down at the house belonging to the man she had refused, and caught herself having a thought she did not entirely like. Austen writes it without a word of defense and without a word of blame. At that moment she felt that to be mistress of Pemberley might be something. The exclamation mark is Austen's. So is the honesty. A lesser novelist would have had Elizabeth reject the thought, or would have hidden it, or would have made the house ugly to keep her pure. This one lets her want it, notices her wanting it, and moves on without comment. That is the same author who gave her the vanity speech, somebody unwilling to let her heroine off. And then, still at the top of that valley, 2 letters arrive from her sister, and one of them is 5 days late. The reason is written into the book in 7 words. Jane had written the direction remarkably ill. The address was badly written. The most important letter in the family's history went to the wrong place and sat there while everything happened. I keep coming back to this because of how much of this novel is paper. The word letter, and its plural, turn up more than 130 times. Almost every hinge in the plot is a document. The letter that changes her mind. The letters that arrive too late about Lydia. The note Lydia leaves. The letter from an uncle that explains who really paid. For a book people file under romance, an extraordinary amount of it is 2 people, in separate rooms, reading. And I think that is why the ending lands, when a book about 2 proud people being humbled really should not. There is no scene where somebody makes a speech and the other person changes their mind. There is a document and a delay and a second look. A titled woman got out of a carriage at their door, took Elizabeth into the garden, and demanded a promise. She opens without a greeting. "You can be at no loss, Miss Bennet, to understand the reason of my journey hither." She wants an undertaking that Elizabeth will never accept him. And she does not get it. "I am only resolved to act in that manner which will, in my own opinion, constitute my happiness, without reference to you or to any person so wholly unconnected with me." Here is the joke Austen buries in that scene. Lady Catherine drives home and reports the conversation to Darcy in order to complain. And the report is what tells him Elizabeth has not refused him outright. So the woman trying to stop the marriage is the one who causes it, by relaying information badly. One more document, delivered by the wrong hands. He asks a second time while they are walking, and the line is a hair away from the one you have probably heard. "My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever." Not have not changed, which is the film. Are unchanged, which is Austen. And what he says afterwards is the closest thing this book has to a moral, and it is about himself, not about her. "I have been a selfish being all my life, in practice, though not in principle." In practice, though not in principle. He always knew the right thing, he simply had never once had to do it. She was flattered into being wrong, and read her way out of it. He was praised into being insufferable, and was written into knowing it. That is a much stranger book than the one on the exam paper, and a much more useful one. The exam version says, "Do not judge people too quickly." Fine. Nobody has ever been helped by that. This version says something harder. It says the accounts you find most convincing are the ones that flatter you, that you will go looking for them without noticing, and that the only thing that ever reliably fixed it was going back to the same evidence when you were no longer angry. Nobody in this novel is talked round. They are handed the evidence and left alone with it.